Great, and now let's officially start. So welcome everyone to the INAHTA webinar on patient involvement in HTA with some tools from HTAI and experiences from some of our fellow INAHTA member agencies. Today I'm pleased to have with us Karen Facey, who is the coordinator of the HTAI Patient Involvement Methods and Impact Working Group. We have Neil Bertelsen, who's the chair of the HTAI Patient and Citizen Involvement in HTA Interest Group, the PCIG, for those of you who are familiar with that group. And we also have some representatives of a couple of our INAHTA member agencies. We have Hervé Navarrete, who is from the HTA division, who's a technical advisor at the French National Authority for Health. And we also have Tamara Rader, who is the Patient Engagement Officer at the Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technologies in Health from CADIF. So I'll be handing off to them in just a moment for their presentations. But before we do, for those of you that have been on the INAHTA webinars before, this time we're trying something a bit new. We're innovating, and we have some polls for you as the audience member to get a bit of your feedback and get some questions and answer in a polling format. So we have a first question for you to get started. Excuse me, and it's, are you familiar with the HTAI interest group on patient and citizen involvement in HTA? Are you familiar with the PCIG? So I will just open that poll now, so you should be able to see the question. So please go ahead and answer yes or no. Are you familiar with the PCIG? Oh, the answers are coming in fast and furious. That's great. Got about 30 seconds left for you to enter your response. This is when you need some background music, some elevator music. All right, great. And now let's see, I'll see if I can share the poll results with you. I'm just checking. I think you should be able to see the poll results. Karen and the other panelists, just checking in if you can see that. We have 14 of 21 that said yes, they are familiar. 4 said no, and there were 3 who didn't answer, so maybe they're a little bit not uncertain. So it looks like most of you are familiar with the HTAI interest subgroup, so that's excellent. But hopefully today, Karen and Neil can share some extra information with you, sharing these really interesting tools. So without further ado, let me hand over to Karen Facey, who will lead us off here in the presentation. Karen, I'll just hand you the presenter role, and you'll be able to navigate through your slides. So whenever you're ready, Karen, please go ahead. Just checking, you may be on mute. There we go.
Thank you, Tara. I've got in front of me Tamara's slides. I'm not sure whether I should...
Let me get those, yes.
Sorry.
There
yes, I had a slight problem when the polling came up that I lost all the dashboard. So that the technology is wonderful if only we could work it. But thank you. These are definitely my slides. So thank you. It is a great honor to be able to present to INAHTA colleagues today. And I was delighted to see in your advert that you called Neil and I friends, and we are indeed friends of INAHTA. And what we'd like to do in this session today is to share with you some of the work we've been doing within HTAI to help support and develop patient involvement in HTA. And I'm going to be presenting from the perspective of particularly the Methods and Impact Working Group. Neil will talk in a more overarching way about the whole work of the interest group and potentials for collaboration in the end. And as Tara has said, we'll hear from Hervé and Tamara about their experiences of using some of the HTAI tools and some of the work they're doing in their own agencies. And so let's start with a reflection on HTA. We know that HTA is a scientific process seeking to inform policy, and therefore science is key. We rely on evidence from sponsors of technology or systematic searches of published literature, and we critically review those to determine the value of a new technology in our own healthcare system. But often the evidence we can find that is published or submitted to us is insufficient, and we have to make value deliberations about how that evidence is relevant to our own healthcare system. So we often have complex models like the economic models shown here. So the kind of questions that arise during an assessment are, what does this evidence mean for us? What are the outcomes that are being presented? Are they relevant to patients? Do they really determine value? Do they show us long-term treatment effects? And how does what we see presented in international trials impact our particular healthcare system? Where should we use this technology in a particular healthcare pathway? Are there variations in the delivery of care that we currently have? And who will benefit most from this medicine? And traditionally, we've liaised with clinical experts to get that kind of information and help us resolve those uncertainties in HTA. But we would like to propose that actually patients and patient groups, here I'm giving you the representation of the European Haemophilia Consortium, that patients can give us unique knowledge that can help us answer these kind of questions that arise in decision uncertainty. And so what we do within the HTA interest group for patient and citizen involvement in HTA is work in a truly interdisciplinary nature. We've got HTA agencies involved, researchers, patients and patient groups, and industry partners. And one of the first things we did when working together, we've been established since 2005, was to recognize that we needed to define the term patient involvement, because involvement is used in different ways, in different contexts, and in different countries. So we define involvement as robust research on patients' perspectives, preferences, and experiences, and as participation in the HTA process. And that can be from topic selection through to dissemination. And those two arms of patient involvement are equally important. And because we saw that the remit of this was very large, about 5 or 6 years ago, we set up a number of working groups to develop different work streams. So as I say, I'm involved in methods and impact, but we also have a group that works on patient involvement and education, and one that works on citizens and community perspectives. And within the interest group, we produce a range of resources that are available widely on our internet, so they're freely available to anybody. We have monthly bulletins that go out to all of our interest group members, and that can be any HTAI member or any patient group representative who signs up to our listserv. As I say, we had to struggle with defining patient involvement, and we produced a seminal paper back in 2010 in the International Journal of Technology in Healthcare that actually laid out the kind of foundation for that definition and our thinking. Following on from that, in 2011, we produced a special edition of the journal, which included further deliberations on methodologies for patient involvement and examples of how HTA agencies were doing patient involvement in practice. We have a special section on the HTI portal where we collect papers of interest, and we produce resources for patients and patient groups. So a guide to HTA, which is available in 6 languages, a glossary for patient groups, and various training materials, including a webinar and an interesting online 1-hour course about a basic guide to HTA. But we also produce a range of resources for HTA agencies, and we've produced those ourselves or in collaboration with other international groups. So we worked in 2015 with INAHTA to develop the social aspects domain of the HTA core model into the patient and social aspects domain, and that was launched in version 3 of the core model. We've worked with the Guidelines International Network to share our tools within their patient and public involvement toolkit, and we promote that toolkit as it's a really excellent resource. We encourage HTA agencies to share with us their own approaches, and we have a template that we ask agencies to complete. And indeed, 11 HTA agencies have produced that, and that's available on our website. The next 3 bullet points noted there, I will talk about in the following slides. And we have also a repository of resources that we're just developing, so it's too early to tell you about that, but that'll be coming news for the future. So I want to focus on 3 particular areas at the moment, particularly this area of patient group submissions. We've recognized that we would like to do systematic reviews of the literature to understand patients' perspectives and experiences, but sometimes our new rapid HTA processes don't allow us to do that. When we're doing HTAs in 3 or 4 months, we don't have time to do those literature reviews. So we've developed a process which goes alongside often an industry submission process whereby patient groups can submit information to us. We've created a template that comes from experience that HTA agencies have had in doing this with patient groups, and it focuses their submission on the areas of decision uncertainty that I talked about at the moment, the areas which we know can influence appraisal committees. So we get them to answer questions about what it's like to live with the illness so that we can understand the therapeutic context, the burden of the illness, and the kind of people that are experiencing the illness and the impact it has on their lives. Then we want to know about their experience with current therapies, and often experiences of side effects and administration of technologies can be important for an appraisal committee to understand. We want to know about their expectations or experiences of new therapy, and we want them to summarize that clearly. And so you'll see here on the screen that on the bottom right, we have the appraisal committee itself, the patient group submission form, and that is meant to be taken by the HTA body and adapted for their own particular process. We also have on the bottom left there a guide that we've created for patient groups, which has been developed from a Canadian guide. And again, we encourage adaptation of that for local use. And there in the top, which you can't really see, is an ethical issues form, because we recognize that we are encouraging patient groups to go out and undertake surveys and do interviews. But when doing that, they need to think about the ethical issues they will face as they are engaging directly with patients. So a whole range of materials has been developed as we have encouraged patient groups to be able to participate in HTA. And we think this is so important because, again, if we take another analogy of HTA, we can think about it as a bridge between scientific evidence and decision making. But if you look at that great picture of Amsterdam down in the bottom there, we think that patient involvement is like the light on that bridge. It can actually illuminate some of the issues in the clinical evidence. We never say it should be replacing the clinical evidence, but it can help us put the clinical evidence and evidence from other sources into perspective to help us understand the burden to patients, important outcomes, and what really is patient benefit. And because we really encourage patient involvement in HTA, we have developed values and quality standards for patient involvement in HTA. This was done through an 18-month research process which worked internationally, including literature reviews and a 3-stage Delphi process. And we identify these 5 values for patient involvement in HTA of relevance, fairness, equity, legitimacy, and capacity building. And then we have 5 standards which are about a general HTA process within an organization, and then 5 standards which are specific for when you're actually undertaking an individual HTA. And they cover areas of how you should communicate with patients, how you should give feedback, and the kind of process issues. Now, these are challenging, and I think that Hervé will talk more later about his views on those. But we recognize that patient involvement is a journey. We can't just produce tools and they'll be the perfect way forward. We need to continue to innovate. And we're pleased to show you, you are the first audience to see this. This is the cover of our book that will be published in ebook and hard copy next month. It has 37 chapters, and it will cover conceptualization of patient involvement, really challenging what we mean by patient involvement and its concepts. looking at methodologies for qualitative and quantitative research so we can understand patients' perspectives and experiences. And it will have a whole range of chapters from countries, many of whom are INAHTA's members, about their experiences of patient involvement in HTA. And I can't share the book with you yet, but I can share with you, Brian has given me his permission to share this with you. He has written a foreword on this, and we were delighted to have your chair write this. And he says, if you're not involving patients, you're not doing HTA. And I think that's a quote I'll be using often from Brian. He's encouraged people to read the book, to let it spark discussion so that we can work together further in the future. And I love the bit at the end there. He says he's going to do his part to support and indeed implement the proposals within agencies and broadly across INAHTA member agencies. So we think that's a great springboard for future collaboration, and we will be encouraging you to obtain the book. But at that point, I'm going to finish, and I'm going to hand back to Tara so she can manage any quick questions of clarification that are coming in. We'll hold broad questions, I think, until the panel session at the end, because I think we've got a good 40 minutes for discussion at the end. But if there are any questions of clarification, I'll be happy to take them now.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Karen. And yeah, as Karen just said, if you have any questions for clarification for Karen, please raise your hand or please go ahead and type them in the chat. If you have any more significant questions, you can maybe hang on to those until the discussion period at the end. Just give another 10 seconds or so for anyone who might be madly typing. And very interesting. Well, congratulations on the book, Karen. We're very honored to see at least the cover, the cover of it. I know I've heard a lot about the book, and I'm looking forward to reading it. So you said it might be available in the next month or so?
I hope so.
Yeah, excellent. Excellent. Okay, great. Well, I don't see any questions coming in, so at this point I'd like to ask another polling question. So hopefully this works as well for you. So this question is, have you seen or used the resources Karen just presented? So I'll open the poll now, and please go ahead and enter your answer. I see the responses coming in, just allowing a few more seconds here for replies. All right, great. So the responses are in. I'll just show the results here. So it looks like we have 6 of our participants have used many of them. 9 have seen them but haven't used them, and 2 have said that they have not seen them before. So it looks like we've got a bit of a mix. Some people are familiar and have used them, and a few have not seen them before. So it looks like we've got a bit of a range here in our participants today. So great. I will just clear that and come back to our presenters here. I think next we have Hervé Navarrete from Haas in France. Hervé, I'll just bring up your slides here and hand the presentation over to you. Great. So Hervé, when you're ready, please go ahead. You can take yourself off of the mute and move through your slides. Hervé Navarrete. Merci. Hello, Hervé. You may be on mute. Hello, Hervé.
Hello.
Can you hear me? Hello.
Yeah, I hear you.
Perfect. Great.
Is it good?
Whenever you're ready, go ahead with your presentation.
Thanks. So, hello everyone. I am going to talk to you about patient involvement and the use of some HTI resources by Autorité de Santé in France. I am going to start by explaining the context, patient involvement at HAS in the field of HTA with a new process that we have developed. Then I will move on the use of some PCIG resources to build this new process. And I will finish by a conclusion to mention other ways of working with PCIG. So the context, we used at Autorité de Santé to do some patient involvement for what we call a full HTA, integrating a scoping phase, a working group, and the final consultation, because there are a lot of opportunities to involve patients in these cases. And for example, it is a case for screenings or public health guidelines. But this patient involvement didn't exist for the shorter rapid HTA process, which lasts only 3 or 4 months and which concerns drugs and medical devices. And I must say that reviewers here for drug and for device assessment are not used to patient input, contrary to people who work in the public health sector. So the objective was to allow patient involvement in the rapid HTA process by adding some submission from patient organizations, PO, to our usual assessment process for drug and device. So we made a kind of benchmark concerning NICE, CADUS, and SMC in Scotland. We defined some procedures, deadline to contribute for the patient groups, support for this group in the process, and this is the topic of the day, template for the expression of patient perspective. So the global, you can see the global scheme of patient submission in our rapid HTA process. Since the end of last year, the submission is sent to the reviewers in the departments and to the members of the committee who can integrate this input in their reflection and deliberation. And we try to prospectively follow the first 6 months between December and May with some indicators with the intent to improve processes. And this will be presented in Rome in June. And now I am going to focus on the use we did of HTI resources, the method, and then the result, and a little discussion. So we translated and discussed 3 HTI documents. Karen spoke about them a little while. The document about values and quality standards, the template for HTA of medicines, and another template for HTA of health interventions, not medicines. So these documents are easy to find on the HTI website, and we can see you can see here what Karen presented, which is the values for patient involvement in HTA and the quality standards. And I put some red lines to put the stress on the different activities and good practices this document contains. For example, on the right, at the top, you can see you have to define an explicit strategy, point 1, point 2, to define, to identify appropriate resources, some activities, point 3, about training inside the agency, point 4, training for patients, point 5, a reflection on your processes. You have to put in place a quality process about patient involvement. And for example, for individual HTAs, point 6, you have to reach a wide range of patients for each HTA to allow them to participate in. And for example, point 9, in each HTA, patient's perspective and experiences are documented, and the influence of patient contribution on conclusions and decisions is reported. So you can see that there are a lot of things to be done. I will come back on that aspect in a little while. And Karen spoke also about the template. Also, they are quite complete. And I put on this slide the chapter heads, information about your group, impact of condition, experiences with current therapies. But in the template, you have some details in each of this chapter to help the patient group to understand what is useful to develop in each chapter of the template. So the result for us, I mean, what is the result for us in our new rapid HTA process? Now we have two templates, a template for drugs and a template for a medical device. There are not a lot of changes compared to the HTA template. You can see on the right the beginning of our template for the drug assessment. Perhaps the main changes are in the information about your group section, which is a more administrative section, because we have to take into account national specificities. And for example, we asked questions about the composition of the board of the patient group to be sure that it is a patient organization. Sometimes it's not very clear. And also, more important, precisions about funding to be sure to be the more transparent possible about possible conflicts of interest. So these are the main changes confronted to the initial HTAI documents. We discussed the document values and quality standards that we saw, but we didn't adopt this document, contrary, for example, to SMC in Scotland. And also, the documents in the French version will be uploaded and maintained on the PCIG page on the HTAI website. It can be useful for other Francophone countries. So what can we say about that, about the fact that we adopted some resources and no other? Concerning the template documents, I think that they represent something very tangible, and it was useful in the discussions at the beginning of the process, because remember that drug and device reviewers here in the French National Authority were not used to patient input. So it was also reassuring to have an international standard to begin with. And at the end of our experiment, we will draw lessons and potentially make changes at the end of the first period in May and June and after. And concerning the values and quality standards document, we can say that this is a very stimulating but very demanding document. You have to put in place different processes, and perhaps you can see that in a progressive way and progressive implementation. So it's useful for self-assessment, for example. This is a target, but this is difficult at the beginning to say, yes, we are going to do all that. And to conclude, I must say we have other kind of relationship with the PCIG. For example, some discussions with some members in order to share and benefit from their experience about what kind of working group can we mobilize in our agency to build the tools. For example, the question of the composition of such a group to try to be the more efficient, and also another technical question about the information put online to enable a patient group to prepare their submission, because this is not trivial. For example, you have the question of the respect of commercial secrecy, which protects the firms, the private firms. There is also working together, and we now participate in the PCIG to try to build new resources. And finally, I would say that the resources, also the newsletter, template, the discussions and the working together contribute to better knowledge and a kind of continual training for members. At least it was the case for me. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Hervé. And if anyone has any questions for Hervé for clarification, anything that wasn't quite clear, feel free to ask the question now. Either raise your hand or enter a question in the chat. Just allowing another minute or two or second or two in case anyone's just typing in the chat. Great, thanks very much, Hervé. As we're waiting here, I'll hand over the presentation getting ready for Tamara's presentation here. Let's get her slides up. There we go. Yeah, I don't see any questions for clarification coming through, Hervé, so it looks like everything was crystal clear, and people are reserving their big questions for the end. They're well trained, so thanks everybody, and thanks Hervé. Great, and now I will hand over to Tamara Rader from CADIS. Tamara, I'll just hand over the presentation to you. Oops, somehow it changed over to the other slides here. Let's bring your slides back. There we go.
Oh, thank you. That's great. So shall I begin, Tara?
Yes, please go ahead, Tamara. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, everyone. As Tara mentioned, my name is Tamara Rader, and I'm Patient Engagement Officer at Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technology in Health, and we call it CADIS. I've been implementing many of the PCIG tools mentioned by Karen and Hervé, and guided by the same values and quality standards guidelines that were mentioned already. At CADIS, I work closely with Ken Bond. He's the Director of Patient Engagement and International Affairs. Sarah Berglis is there in the middle, and she's the other Patient Engagement Officer. And Helen Mai, who's not pictured, but she plays a similar role at the Pan-Canadian Oncology Drug Review. So that's our agency for cancer drugs in Canada. Together, we work to implement the varied patient engagement strategies across CADIS with advice from other staff, such as Laura Weeks, and also our colleagues at INAHTA. Today I'll begin by describing CADIS a little bit, although many may be familiar with our work, and the range of health technology assessment programs we run. As part of my description, I'll review how we involve patients in the HTA process and ensure that their perspectives are reflected in our assessments and deliberations. And then I'll comment on the evolution of this work with patient groups and individuals in the areas of communications and our annual CADIS symposium. Through these descriptions, I will highlight what I think are the most innovative aspects of the strategies that we use, and then I'll finish my short talk by describing some of the challenges. It might seem like a lot to cover in 10 minutes, so I welcome anyone to be in touch by email after. Just to describe our agency a little bit in this slide. I won't dwell on that, but the slides will be available after. CADIS programs include two main health technology assessment programs, so those are the top two that are mentioned. One is focused on drug reimbursement, and the other is the Health Technology Management Program. And this is health technology assessments and optimal use of medical, surgical, dental devices and procedures, as well as diagnostic and screening tests. Across CADIS programs, patients are involved and provide feedback or information to inform these assessments in different ways. The ways that they're invited to give their perspectives differ depending on the product. Today I'll briefly cover patient involvement in the CADIS programs and then talk about our evolution. I'm going to start with the drug reimbursement recommendations work. Karen described the template for patient group submissions, and we follow this process using the template also with very few adaptations, although we do the same adaptation Hervé mentioned about collecting information about the patient group and conflict of interest. Patient input is sought early in the process, in the assessment process, so that information can be used to inform the assessment protocol. For example, what outcomes are important to consider? Once the assessment is complete, then the patient input is presented directly to the expert committee. It informs their deliberations and reimbursement recommendations. The expert committees also include either a patient member in the case of oncology review or a public member in the case of other drugs. CADIS staff observe the meetings, and we note instances in the discussion where the patient input was mentioned. And then we try to feed that back to the patient group for their information and for future submissions. The patient input submission is shared with all the public drug plans in Canada as part of the whole recommendation package. I also want to describe how patient perspectives are considered in other CADIS programs. For HTAs for drug classes and medical devices, and the dental devices and surgical or diagnostic tests, we follow a different process for engaging patients and capturing their perspectives in our assessments. For this, we use a systematic review of qualitative literature that describes patient perspectives and experiences conducted. So the timeline is a bit longer for these types of assessments, and so we're able to try and do a systematic review of quality evidence synthesis. So the review process follows the standard processes for a systematic review, including a literature search from multiple databases, critical appraisal, analysis. There's a protocol that's produced in advance. All the usual standards for a systematic review are applied for these reviews of qualitative literature on patient perspectives and experiences. A report of the qualitative evidence synthesis forms the distinct chapter within the HTA, and this is submitted to the expert committee for deliberation. In this case, the expert committee is the Health Technology Expert Review Panel. It uses a deliberative framework to guide their discussions and the development of their recommendations. The qualitative evidence synthesis, this chapter of the report, for them, it fulfills one of the criteria of their deliberative framework, and this is related to what they term patient preferences. I'm just going to mention briefly our scientific advice program. This is a voluntary fee-for-service consultation, and we offer this to pharmaceutical companies about clinical trial design. So the goal is to inform and support pharmaceutical companies early in the process so that they can do clinical trial design from an HTA perspective. Due to some issues, around confidentiality for the patient, it's sort of a proprietary protection for the company also. The patient input process, as it is used for drug reimbursement programs, can't be used. Often we don't know the name of the drug, and the company at this early stage doesn't like to share too many information with the public. So due to these issues around confidentiality, the patient input process cannot be used as we normally would for drugs. And the timeline also doesn't allow for a comprehensive literature review either. So instead, as part of the scientific advice program, CADIS staff will conduct individual interviews with patients and sometimes caregivers to obtain details on symptoms, the impact of those symptoms and the condition, the treatment experiences that they've had so far, and their thoughts from the patient perspective on a proposed trial design with particular focus on health-related quality of life outcomes. So the way we find participants, they're identified through established patient groups and clinical contexts. So the networks and relationships we've built up in the drug reimbursement work and the CADIS other partnerships actually helps us recruit patients so that we can talk to them about early trial design for this program. So those people who have broad exposure to other patients' viewpoints are recruited, typically with 1 or 2 patients also being interviewed for each project. Insights from these interviews are used to confirm or maybe identify patient-important outcomes and relevant comparators and support the advice that CADIS gives to the company. A confidential summary of the patient-caregiver interview is shared with the manufacturer. This adds a unique perspective to pharmaceutical companies who are increasingly being challenged to include patient perspectives and patient-important outcomes in their trials. Okay, so I've just described 3 strategies for engaging patients at CADIS, patient group input submissions for our drug reimbursement work, qualitative evidence synthesis or qualitative systematic reviews for our device work and non-drug work, and also interviews with individuals when it comes to scientific advice for future trials. Building on existing patient engagement activities at CADIS means continuing to seek patients' perspectives by identifying opportunities to engage with patients across all of our work. We aim for equitable treatment, which means that clinicians, industry, patient groups have equal opportunity to contribute. One way CADIS does this, and I know Karen mentioned Brian O'Rourke's message there, is this idea of having dedicated staff to support quality communications and reaching out when necessary to ensure that full involvement is supported. Things like proactive communication and going back to patient groups with questions about their submissions from the committee, things like that, just supporting that relationship between the agency and our patient group contributors. To this end, CADIS holds information sessions twice per year for patient groups. For convenience, we hold the information sessions in Toronto, where many of the representatives are located. The sessions are an opportunity to receive an update on our drug portfolio, including CADIS Common Drug Review, the Pan-Canadian Oncology Drug Review, and all of our therapeutic reviews. In addition, we also provide updates on other CADIS programs, especially as on patient engagement and the work we're doing there. We will ask for topics in advance to the patient groups and suggestions for the agenda to make it relevant to the participants. The annual symposium is an opportunity to engage patients and encourage them to submit material to the program. They might volunteer for a committee, attend as a participant, and network with other people working in HTA. Since 2016, the symposium has met the criteria to be considered a patients-included event. To meet the criteria, patients must be involved in the planning of the event, including selection of themes, topics, and speakers. Patients appear in the audience and on stage, excuse me, and their interests are reflected in the program. Costs for patient speakers are paid in full, and extra funding is available for other participants who want to participate. And also, we try and meet the disability requirements for participants. And finally, we try and enable virtual participation with free streaming and videos whenever possible. We hold workshops at this event for non-experts and point them to the PCIG materials, such as the glossary that Karen mentioned and the templates and other work that's available and other resources that are available to them. And finally, I want to mention the CADIS Patient Community Liaison Forum. It was established in 2013 to provide a means to share information and collaborate on broad issues affecting patient groups. Its purpose is to build understanding, help identify priorities for activities at CADIS, and facilitate the gathering of feedback on new processes, new patient engagement processes. I'm just going to take a quick drink of water. So, just a little commentary on what I've mentioned so far. As CADIS evolves and builds on past experiences, we can expand our activities. Our goal is to enable mutual communication to foster that collaboration with the patient community so our work becomes more relevant to them. Patient groups receive individual feedback on their patient input submission with advice particular to the work that they've submitted. With reviews of the qualitative evidence, we have found informally that the expert committees recognize the value of having this perspective to inform their deliberative process. So one way we've tried to expand that is to get patient input into the protocol for those evidence synthesis. And that might be through a phone call or a series of emails, sharing the early plan for the report. Patients who have come to our information sessions can be called upon to help with new initiatives, such as the scientific advice program I mentioned, or knowledge mobilization, or knowledge translation, that type of work. Dissemination of recommendations. Patient groups also have other roles that we haven't fully explored. We have worked to improve the participation in the CADIS Symposium, and we've noticed more abstracts submitted from patient groups and patients and more applications to our Travel Award program. And also, regular contact with the Patient Liaison Forum also helps to maintain ongoing relationships with leaders in patient organizations. While we're glad to be strengthening our relationships with the patient community across Canada, we do see opportunities to improve and evolve our future work. One example is ensuring that our policy on conflict of interest declarations is fair and appropriate across all our stakeholder groups. We don't want to make the process more difficult for patient groups to declare their conflicts of interest than it is for other committee members, our clinical experts, or other contributors, for example. But as Hervé mentioned, committees do want to know about conflict of interest, and they do want to know about the group and whether it's a true patient group and who it represents. So we're sensitive about collecting that information in a way that works for patient groups. We don't want the process to have any unnecessary barriers, and we're trying to keep things simple. Another discussion for the future is to ensure that all patient groups are able to contribute equally. CADIS already invests in supporting patient involvement by dedicating staff members to these activities, but we feel that sometimes more investment might be needed. Since we know that in Canada, not all groups are on equal footing. For example, some patient groups have staff members and others are totally volunteer run. So we would like to explore ways to reduce the variation between burden on making submissions and the variation between the submissions, either through financial resources or improved processes or supporting the use of the tools and resources that Karen and Hervé have already mentioned. So I think that wraps up what I wanted to say today, but I'm happy to talk about any of the other challenges or issues that I've mentioned. So these are some ways that you can get in touch with us or follow our work or connect with us. So thank you for letting me share some of our work with you, and I'm happy to hear from you in any of these ways. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Tamara. Very interesting. I learned a lot myself from your presentation, so thanks very much. If anyone has any questions for clarification for Tamara, please raise your hand or enter those in the chat. We have Neil to present, and then we'll get into our bigger discussion here. So just giving another few seconds. We also have our final polling question. So this is, what kinds of patient involvement research methodologies are you interested in? And there's a number here in the poll, and you can check as many as you like. Multiple answers are allowed. So I will launch that poll now for you. Let me click the right button here, open the poll. All right, so there you go. So please go ahead. What kind of methodologies are you interested in learning about? The responses are streaming in. Allowing another 40 seconds or so. All right, it looks like most people have responded here. I'll just, oh, a little bit of activity. People reading those options carefully. Excellent work. All right. Okay, it looks like everyone's complete. I'll close the poll and let's see what the results say. Great, so you should be able to see there. It looks like most of you, 15, have said they like the synthesis of published qualitative research. And it looks like next in line there is primary qualitative research, followed by quantitative preference methods, and at 8 responses, analysis of social media. And 3 of you have said other, so that's intriguing. I wonder what that other is. So maybe we can enter into some, you can explain some of that in the discussion piece here that we'll be entering in just a minute or two. So thanks for your responses, really interesting. And like I said, we'll come back to some of this in the discussion section. All right, so now coming back to the presenters, let me hand over to Neil Bertelsen, who will talk a bit about his, oh, I have a question from Susan Miles here. Sorry, Tamara. Let's see what the question is. General, oh, it's a general question for the end, so we'll come back to that. So let's go back to Neil here. I'll hand over the presenter role to you, Neil, and I don't know why it always kicks back to the different slide deck, but let me try that again. There we go.
Thank you very much, Tara.
Yeah, whenever you're ready.
No, thank you. So really, it's great to be talking to you all today, because I think you've heard a story building throughout the presentations that you've heard today. So if you imagine that we started with that description of the tools that we have, and then from Karen and then Hervé really talking quite a lot of detail about how those tools were really recently implemented in a rapid appraisal process. And then what we've heard from Tamara following that is how that process and that constant learning and evolution of patient involvement and patient perspectives and experiences, how that evolves within the agencies once those initial steps are taken. And so this is going to be quite a short presentation, but I wanted to give you a sort of helicopter view of the perspective from from our interest group perspective of how we work together and how we learn from each other. Because I think, certainly for me as chair of the group, one of the areas that I found most fruitful working with this interest group and working with the people around this interest group is the shared knowledge and learning and new ideas that are generated when people from different disciplines come together to start looking at these problems. So I think the first thing to say is when we think about patient involvement, patient perspectives, experience, evidence, we have to recognize that there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And we've talked in the past at length to other HTA bodies in different parts of the world that because of the way their governments are set up, the way their healthcare system runs, the way that their cultural societal factors play a role within the public space, all have an impact on how patient involvement, patient perspectives can be brought into a HTA process. And I think one of the critical things that we focus on here is not to try and paint a picture that there's a single gold standard answer to patient involvement, but actually there's multiple routes of getting there. And certainly as an interest group, we want to very much be cognizant of those different perspectives and those different routes and really understand where we can most add value as an interest group with our resources and how we develop those resources so we're meeting the needs across those different routes. And if I think about the sort of evolution of the tools and the materials within the interest group, I think there's always this cycle of learning. It's fine to develop a resource and it's great that those resources are used, but it's actually through the experience of using those kinds of resources and that learning that happens, as an interest group, hearing back from people that are using them so that we can work together on shaping those tools, understanding the different practices within the different agencies and looking across our networks to see how we can solve some of the challenges or the problems. So I think that this cycle of learning is something that's always ongoing, and I think Hervé expressed it really well towards the end of his presentation, that certainly the interest group is an opportunity for people to continuously engage in not just learning, but actually moving things forward as a collective of different disciplines. So I think what we're looking for when I think about in the context of this particular webcast is a lot of you said that you've used the tools that Karen presented at the beginning. Some of you have only seen them for the first time, but we're always really keen to understand how those tools are being used. And in particular, when people are looking at those tools for the first time, so those people who clicked on that voting button to say it was the first time they'd seen these tools, it's sort of, when you look at them for the first time, what is it that occurs to you? Are there some immediate gaps or things that are not clear that we could easily rectify? So that kind of knowledge is important to share. And this really comes back to that knowledge that you're sharing. It really comes back to sharing your experience. And we've talked today, and Karen set up talking about the resources and the tools in terms of it's really about understanding what the patient experience is within a particular disease context that makes the HTA stronger, that makes the HTA decision-making stronger. And similarly for us, actually understanding people's experience of initiating patient involvement processes or using particular tools, whether those be tools that have been developed by this interest group, or actually there may be other tools that exist out there. That really helps us build our body of knowledge and helps us really strengthen the evolution of those tools or the development of new tools as we go forward. So your insights across the INAHTA network are really valuable insights to really understand what are those challenges, what were those areas that were really difficult to solve as you started to think about patient involvement processes. And that leads back to the feedback and shaping. So really helping us to make the tools better by feeding back to us. And so any of you that also receive the e-bulletins from the interest group will see that quite often we have consultations about documents. There's been a recent one that just closed in the last few weeks, looking at the templates and getting some feedback on those templates so that those templates can be improved. And that was very much a diagnostic template that we were talking about there. But that feedback is really vital for us so that we can strengthen the tools. So what needs adapting when you look at these tools? If you try to implement these tools, what were the challenges and how can we help make it clearer or point people in the right direction so that those challenges can be overcome quite quickly? And I suppose when we think about that different journey that I talked about at the beginning of the presentation, and then there isn't a gold standard, there isn't a right way of getting to this final destination. It's what's missing when you look at the resources and the tools that are there already. What still needs to be developed? That's not necessarily needs to be developed by the interest group. That could be something that we could focus on, but actually we need to understand what those gaps are because we work very much in partnership with other organizations, and so understanding what those gaps are helps us to really focus on where the needs really are and make sure that resources are being put to solving problems that are the right problems to solve for right now. And I think we need to understand the practices within HTA bodies. So what are those current practices? How do things flow through the organization? What procedures are in place around patient involvement, or what procedures are being planned? Because understanding that flow through the organization helps us to really think about how we tailor our resources and how we make sure that the resources, the activities, the dialogues that we generate are really focusing in the right areas. So understanding the practices within your organizations we find really valuable, and that's been one of the really interesting things. If you go to the interest group website, you'll see there's some documents, some templates which are being filled in with some good practices from different organizations. And actually collecting those good practices really helps us share the body of knowledge and share the experience. So we're always keen to hear from agencies, organizations that are starting or that have tried different approaches to patient involvement, and they want to share their experience of that and really help others, not make the same mistakes if there's been some challenges along the way, but also get much quicker to the solutions that work in different environments. And then onto networks. So Karen quite clearly explained that we are a multidisciplinary network. So we're a different kind of network from the INAHTA network. So we have access to different stakeholder groups, different perspectives. And there could be valuable opportunities for reaching out to our network, for helping us. We can facilitate access to our network of members in terms of helping to put people in touch with others that might have had an experience that's valuable for a situation or a process that you're thinking about, and vice versa as well. It could be that as we are developing resources and tools, or we have a particular idea that we're investigating and seeing how that would work, that there's an opportunity to reach out to the INAHTA network to get some feedback on that as well. So I think the networks across INAHTA and the interest group are different networks. There's a lot of overlap between them, obviously, with the HTA bodies, but actually they are different networks and they have different values and different skills. And it would be really useful at times when it's appropriate and when it's really adding value to actually be able to leverage our networks with each other so that we can really start solving problems and getting insights that are needed so that we can help develop better tools, better frameworks, better processes going forward. And for us, we've heard today from Hervé and Tamara that it's about implementation. So we never want the resources that are created to sit on a website and just occasionally be leafed through. If we are truly going to make a difference, it's through implementing patient involvement processes. And so really our call is to look at those tools, look at those resources, see how they can help, feed back to us if they can be made better, but also keep this dialogue open so that we can really push forward on the implementation of patient involvement processes and strategies within organizations. And this can only, I think, be sustained with collaboration. So we're very keen of working with other organizations, with partnering where it's appropriate so that we get the best possible results out of the work that we do. We leverage our network properly, and we lead on to implemented processes that we can then start measuring and assessing and continually improving the patient involvement processes within HTA. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Neil. Thanks very much. If anyone has any clarifying questions, please ask those now or ask your open questions. Let's get into some discussion. And I'll maybe start off with Susan Miles' question here. She answered this in the chat to me. So her question is, can Tamara tell us more about the PPI efforts in CADTH's rapid response program? Are there any specific challenges, or have you encountered any specific challenges there, Tamara, in the PPI efforts at CADTH?
PPI, I guess, means patient involvement or patient input into rapid response, if I understand the question.
Yeah, I see. I think that's patient involvement input in the rapid response. Yeah.
Yeah. So that is one area where right now we don't have any formal patient input into our rapid response program. There's the volume of rapid responses that come to CADTH. So far, we haven't found a way to easily incorporate patient input, although I can mention two exceptions. In Canada, in the news, often people on the line might know that we're facing an opioid crisis, so there's some issues with inappropriate prescribing of opioids, overdose, addiction issues, just misuse of those products. And so we've formed a task force, and we have patient involvement in that task force. And so they have been able to influence the choice of rapid responses that we are forming to meet that information need around Canada's opioid crisis. And so I feel like that will hopefully become an example for future rapid responses at CADIS to incorporate patient views in a more formal way. But it's a great question because it's one area where we haven't really been able to formalize patient input.
Okay, great. And Susan had a follow-on question here, if that's all right, how specifically does, again, back to you, Tamara, at CADIS, how specifically does CADIS reflect the patient input in their deliberative committee process and final recommendations? Is it via presentations, a patient issues section, or in another way?
Yeah, it's a couple of ways. So the patient input submission is presented by the public member or the patient member at the committee. So it's read out to the committee member, especially any sort of direct quotations from patients. The reviewers will incorporate that patient input into their report, and then the whole submission is an appendix on the report. So it informs the entire package. Sarah Bergless or I might listen into the committee deliberations, and then we provide a feedback letter to the patient group who submitted the input, just to highlight the areas that some of their input might have sparked some discussion or deliberation. So this helps them to prepare future submissions, but it also gives them specific feedback on their work. So I guess we're trying to close the loop, if you will. So instead of their feedback or their input, coming to CADIS and then they don't hear what happens to it next, we sort of follow and track the input along the process and let them know.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and if anyone has any questions, like I said, please raise your hand or enter your question in the chat box there on the right side of your screen. And I know we have a number of people here from different agencies, and some of your agencies have maybe different patient involvement models or tools that you're using. So, you know, perhaps in KCE or in Evalia T, there's some resources and handbooks, etc. So if anyone on the line from those agencies wishes to comment or share some of their experiences, please do. I know we'd be interested in hearing some of your experience as well. And as we're waiting for hands to raise and questions in the chat box, I maybe have a question for the panelists. So in INAHTA, of course, we have a range of different kinds of agencies. Some are more established agencies, maybe with a few more resources, and some are just starting up. Some are within the Ministry of Health, smaller units, etc. And Karen, sorry, I see your hands up. Did you want to make a comment?
I think it might address the question you're about to ask. I was just going to say that I think that what Tamara's presentation did was show that they have been thoughtful about different forms of patient participation and research that could be used in different situations, because they have a wide range of outputs that they used. So from their rapid responses, where they have individuals involved in committee, through to calling individual patient experts or patients themselves to ask them questions and background, through to patient group submissions and qualitative evidence synthesis in a rapid way and in a full way for a health technology assessment. And I think that's actually a really important thing, and it picks up on Neil's presentation, that patient involvement has to be bespoke. So first of all, you have to identify what you want to get out of the patient involvement, and then design it in a way to meet the needs of the process. So we recognize that sometimes it has to be rapid, but I would say the least thing you could do is actually talk to a patient expert about issues of importance. So you can do that, and that takes one phone call from a researcher. It doesn't have to be a huge, great process if you don't have time or resources to do that.
Yes, that does feed into my question. I was just thinking for smaller agencies that are starting, where would they start? What are some of those sort of early initial steps they might take in sort of moving in this direction? And I think you just answered that by that sort of direct call from a researcher, or just sort of starting small and probably just asking the question, having that space within the HTA process where patient input is recognized, and just asking that question. Right, and I see a question. Oh, Yanni raised her hand, and then she was gone. Oh, there she is. Okay, great. I'll go ahead, Yanni. I'll take you off mute here, and please go ahead. Hello, Yanni.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I just had that same kind of question. How would you, as a smaller agency, how would you then reach out to the patients? And because of different cultural backgrounds, I think there has to be also different ways of reaching out, and you cannot just have one way. Maybe the start would be a phone call, and then by and by, when they're used to the process, which can take a couple of years maybe, then comes the questionnaire and involving them actively in the deliberative process. I would just like to hear some comments from Karen or Tamara or someone. Thanks.
Thanks, Yanni. And our panelists, any reactions to Yanni's question or comment there? Karen?
That's a really good point. And Yanni raises something there that we haven't talked about. We talked about patient involvement as a journey, but it's also a relationship. And actually, ideally, one builds relationships with patient groups. And I would always say, start with a trusted patient group, because we all know that there will be patient groups who are challenging, who are more focused on lobbying in policy, but there are others actually who are very research orientated, who perhaps are involved in quality improvement in the healthcare system more generally. So identify in a sense a patient group you can work with, and work with them in a very conciliatory way, one which is where you're working together. And I would always say, actually, do pilots of things. You don't have to set things in stone to start with, but start building that relationship with the patient group to work out what's going to work in your own HTA process, but in your political context as well. So very much developmental and continuous improving, again, as Neil's great diagram showed.
Thank you. And Neil, did you want to comment? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just add to that from the patient group perspective. I mean, recently I've been in international meetings with patient groups from lots of different countries, big and small. And some of those patient groups have a very good established patient involvement process with their HTA body, and some don't have any of that process at all. And so I posed the same question to them. So the ones that have really good engagement and an official process, how did they start? And they said it started with the talking, it started with that relationship. And alongside that, you had groups, patient groups from some of the smaller countries saying, we've been invited to several meetings, but it's just talk. We don't see any action. And these more experienced groups actually said, I know it's frustrating as a patient group. I know it's frustrating when you come to these meetings and you're still talking about it, but that's where we started. And now we have a process and a system. And it does take time, but it is those relationships that matter. And it is actually just putting a toe into the water and getting some of that feedback and getting some of that dialogue, hearing the way that patients and patient organizations experience the healthcare system in the local setting, that can be valuable in itself as you're thinking about your processes and systems. And it can only grow from there once you start that dialogue. But as Karen says, it doesn't have to be set in stone, and at least you're starting to talk, so you're starting to explore the opportunities.
Thanks, Neil. And Tamara, did you wish to add something?
Yeah, just quickly, I'm just so happy to hear Neil and Karen's comments, because even as an established agency, we still interact with patients who have never participated before, or patient groups who face staffing changes, and so we often go back to the basics of building those relationships. It's a great reminder. I find that for smaller agencies or agencies who are starting out, it helps to be very clear about the role of the patient in the process. So we treat, or we like to think of patients as we do with clinical experts. So these are, the patient groups are bringing a certain perspective, certain expertise that can't be found elsewhere in the HTA process. And so if we consider their input that way, then it manages their expectation of how their work will be used. So just being very transparent and clear about what they can expect from the experience helps a lot. And back to Yanni's original question about reaching out, it is true that we have to really tailor our interaction with how the patient group wants to work. So just as we do with clinical experts, some people prefer to talk on the phone and some people prefer to use email. So we do have to be bespoke in our interactions and our relationships, as Karen mentioned. So thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Tamara and the panelists. I've got a question here from Hervé. So Hervé is a panelist, but he's also asking a question. How's that for multitasking? So Hervé, your question here in the chat to me is, again, for Kadith. In Kadith, linked to the system of patient contribution, did patient groups ask for hearings? He says this demand exists in France. So linked to the system of patient contribution, did patient groups ask for any hearings in Kadith experience?
Yes, patients would like to attend the meetings, the deliberations, and make testimonials. But so far, Kadith doesn't participate or use patient input that way. But yes, we have the same interest from patient groups to be present at the meeting.
Okay, great. One more question here from Susan Miles in the chat. She says, how important are dedicated patient involvement staff? Can it be built into a researcher role within individual projects? And she says she welcomes HAS or Kadith reflections on this. So how important are those dedicated patient involvement staff, or can it be built into the researcher role within individual projects? So Hervé and Tamara, yeah, Tamara, go ahead.
Yeah, I believe that it can be built into the researcher role, and it's good to start small. Our health policy analyst, Helen Mai, and she's at the Pan-Canadian Oncology Review. Her role isn't solely patient engagement, although she does work with patient groups quite regularly. So that's an example within Kadith where a non-patient engagement officer does that work. And I can see how the role could be incorporated into other tasks as well.
And Hervé, any reaction from HAS in France about that dedicated staff, or if it can be integrated into a researcher role?
Yeah, this is a question you have, because we have, as I said, we have a strong distinction between sectors. That doesn't exist at all for drugs and device, as you understood, and we have a little practice about that for public health, but this is not a lot developed. And I think that after the process I explained about rapid HTA, we are going to have a more general reflection, putting the stress, for example, on qualitative research. And probably it will be a next step for us.
Okay, excellent. We've got a few questions here lined up in the Q&A. Let me head to this here. We have Naomi Ferns, and her question is, I wonder how Hervé has found the patient group submissions being introduced influence the HTA process. Have they influenced the actual decisions or recommendations of the rapid HTAs? So Hervé, just wondering if you can respond to that. How have the patient submissions influenced the decisions in those rapid HTAs?
Yeah, so the process, the new process has just begun. So I do like in CADES and other agencies, we attend the committees and we note the elements of which intervene in the discussion, and after we have a return when we speak to the patient group to explain. So this is the first part of the answer, and what we are going to try to do, but this is just the beginning, is to have a kind of typology of the impact these elements can have in the discussion. And I think this is quite important to be able to say that this kind of point contained in a patient submission can have a role in a discussion, and to be able to make a global picture. But we are just beginning this work, and perhaps I am going to work with the university to have more resources to do that, because this is a different aspect. There is a material and a logistical aspect to be sure that it works, that we receive some submission, and this is a success. We do receive submissions because, for example, since last December we have 15 submissions, and it continues. And there is another aspect which is more qualitative and which consists in understanding the role it can have in discussion. But we are just at the beginning of noting all these elements.
Right, and I see, Naomi, your hand is up here. Did you have just a follow-up question or clarification there? I'll take you off mute. Hi, Naomi.
And speak on what I have on. Can you hear me?
Hello. Yes.
Oh,
yes.
right, sorry. That was actually a mistake. I didn't mean to put my hands up,
Okay.
but that was an excellent answer from Hervé, so thanks very much. That was really interesting, and I agree that, you know, it's really important that the idea of a typology of the impact of starting to really look at what kind of impact we get from that is really key. So I'd be really interested to hear what comes out of that in the future.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Thanks for your question. And moving down here, see we have quite a few questions. Let me head to this question from Irina Cleanput. She says, do agencies sometimes pay patients for their participation, for example, for coming to meetings, etc.? And maybe we can open that up to any of the panelists that want to respond. So do agencies sometimes pay their patients for participation?
I could start with that one if you'd like, Tara.
Mm-hmm.
Just as an overview, a number of agencies pay travel expenses if they ask a patient organization to come to a meeting. And I think, if I'm right, NICE is the only agency that actually pays an organization to make their submission. I don't think any other agency does that, but I can be corrected by anybody on the call if that's not right.
Anyone else on the panel? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's Tamara. Where I agree with Karen, CADES doesn't pay patient groups for their submission, although that's been suggested to us in some cases. However, we do pay an honorarium for individual patients who might spend an hour being interviewed by us for a scientific advice project. So that's just a sort of a recognition of their time spent on the phone with us.
Hervé, did you have anything to add to this question?
Yeah, the first thing we did in the 2008 was to put the patient at the same level as clinician experts, and they are paired for their travel and for their presence in the working group. But we don't pay them for their submission. And some patient groups said to me that making the submission could be quite expensive, in fact.
Right, and I see a comment from Elizabeth Gustafson from SBU. She adds that SBU always pays patient participants for their contribution to their reports, as we do for all of their other experts. So just an addition there from SBU. Moving down to another question here from Jose Asua. He asks, how many of your assessments, or what percentage of your assessments really involve patients in the process? So A very direct question from Jose. So how many of your assessments really involve patients in the process? And maybe I'll ask the panelists, Tamara and Hervé, to respond to that.
It's Tamara speaking. Every drug assessment that's been done since 2014 has had patient input invited. I don't have the exact number of those. It's very rare these days that we would put a call for patient input and not get it, but it does happen for certain drugs. And in those cases, sometimes we'll seek out an individual patient, if a patient group doesn't exist. But since 2014, there's been sort of regular patient input.
And Hervé, in the HAS experience?
Yeah, I can give a figure concerning our new rapid process. Since December, it was possible to contribute for something like 45 drugs, and 15 patient groups did that. That means 1 among 3. I don't know if we will continue on this level, on this rhythm, but we observed that part between December and now.
Great. And Karen, I'm not sure I saw you. Did you want to add something to this discussion?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'm looking at the question and answer. It looks like there's a lineup of people, but actually I'm just looking through the Q&A. We've addressed all of the questions that are in our list here. I see that Elizabeth from SBU has responded here. From the SBU perspective, she says that most of the assessments at SBU do have some level of participation, and that their current goal is to have it in the project process for all of the products in 2018. So it looks like SBU is engaged actively in patient involvement as well. So I'm not sure how to clear all those questions off. Like I said, it looks like there's a lot of questions, but there's not. We've responded to all of them. So, and I also am aware that we're coming to the end of the session. So maybe I'll just open up for the panelists. Any final comments or closing comments before we sign off?
Tamara, shall I start and then let the others follow in the order we did the presentations? Just to say, this has been very interesting for us to hear the feedback. And one of the things we'd like to explore with INAHTA is whether a sort of regular sort of surgery for patient involvement would be good in this sort of format with a webinar. And I can see kind of 2 areas. There's one around for you to be able to talk to other HTA bodies to talk about how do you set up participation processes for patient involvement. And there's another one which is about research methodologies. So I see Irina online there. I'm talking to her about preference studies, but the comments that have been made about typology of impact, you know, we could have some really interesting discussions if we were to bring in our researchers who could help with that discussion. And just a kind of question there for INAHTA perhaps to think about whether we could make this somewhat of a regular sort of patient involvement surgery session between INAHTA and HTAI. But thank you for the opportunity today. It's been great. I'll pass over now to Hervé.
I think that one topic which could be very interesting to share is the first pointed by Karen. This is being able to share the general reflection an agency can have to define, to improve existing processes and to define new ones. For example, I was very interested by the work Ontario agency did in 2012, I think, and by the more recent work of NICE to improve their current processes. And the way an agency does to improve and its processes and to have a general view about all the processes is a very interesting project for an agency to understand that.
Thank you, Hervé. And over to Tamara. Any final comments?
Just to say again to thank you very much for letting me be involved, and it was a very interesting discussion, and it's given me a lot to take back to the group here, and I'm going to share all the questions with them, and so we can talk and maybe improve some of our other programs that don't have patient involvement yet. So thank you.
Great, thank you. And Neil, any closing comments?
Yes, well, thank you very much, everybody that's contributed. And for me, I think the questions are really revealing and they really help, and it shows that this dialogue is really valuable, because when we think about those questions, they're all about the, what is the process? Do you pay patients, and how, do all of your assessments have patient involvement, and how do we make this work for smaller agencies or those that are just starting out? And they're really critical questions as to how we can develop the tools and the guidances and the resources, but how we can also keep this dialogue going so that we can understand what those questions continue to be, and hopefully start to work together on some of the solutions around those and some of the guidance around those. But thank you so much, everybody.
Great. Well, thanks again to everyone who joined us on the session today. Thank you to our panelists, Karen, Neil, Hervé, and Tamara. I've learned a lot as well, not being an expert in patient involvement, really interesting area. And on behalf of all INAHTA members, thank you very much for your time in contributing to this webinar. As I mentioned, a YouTube version will be available in the members area in a week or two, and I'll let you all know when that's there. And we've got a pretty clear invitation from our friends at the PCIG, Karen and Neil. So any INAHTA member who wants more information or has an interest in sharing your experiences, please feel free to get in touch with Karen and Neil. I'm sure I'll be able to convince them to share their contact information with you. So get in touch with me or Karen and Neil directly. So. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. I hope you have a lovely afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.